There is a letter in the National Anthropological Archives in Washington, D.C. that most researchers walk past without opening. It was written in 1897. The author is Cyrus Thomas, head of the Division of Mound Exploration for the Bureau of Ethnology, a branch of the Smithsonian Institution. The letter is addressed to a field agent stationed in Ohio, and the subject line reads, "On the proper disposition of anomalous skeletal material." Anomalous. That word will matter later. The letter itself is brief. It instructs the agent to crate and ship any skeletal remains exceeding 6 feet in height to Washington immediately, without filing local reports and without notifying county or state authorities. It uses the phrase, "for proper classification," 3 times. I found this letter because I was looking for something else entirely. I was cross-referencing newspaper archives from the 1880s, specifically reports of mound excavations in the Ohio Valley, when I noticed a pattern I could not explain. Local newspapers would report a discovery, a team would arrive from Washington, and then the story would simply stop. No follow-up, no museum display, no published findings. The discovery would enter the record once and then disappear. I kept pulling that thread. What I found at the end of it was not a conspiracy in the dramatic sense. It was something quieter and in many ways more troubling.
Here is what the history books say, and they are not entirely wrong. The Smithsonian Institution was founded in 1846, funded by the bequest of British scientist James Smithson, who left his entire estate to the United States to create what he called an establishment for the increase and diffusion of knowledge. By the 1880s, the Smithsonian's Bureau of Ethnology, later renamed the Bureau of American Ethnology, had launched one of the most ambitious archaeological survey programs in American history. They called it the Mound Exploration Program. Between 1881 and 1894, they excavated more than 2,000 earthen mounds across the eastern United States, cataloging artifacts, skeletal remains, and cultural objects from pre-Columbian Native American civilizations. The program produced a landmark report in 1894, the 12th annual report of the Bureau of Ethnology, which concluded that the mounds were built by the ancestors of contemporary Native American tribes and not by any lost or unknown civilization. That is the official position. It has been the official position for 130 years. That conclusion is true in part, but it is incomplete in ways that matter enormously.
Let us begin with the newspaper record. Not theory, the actual printed record. Between 1860 and 1900, American newspapers, the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Worthington Advance, the Steubenville Daily Herald, no fewer than several dozen reports of unusually large skeletal remains being unearthed from burial mounds, farm excavations, and construction sites across Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Tennessee, and West Virginia. These were not fringe publications running sensational stories. They were regional and national papers of record. The descriptions are consistent in ways that are difficult to dismiss. Remains described as measuring between 7 and 9 feet. Skulls significantly larger than modern human skulls. Double rows of teeth, a condition called hyperdontia, a real genetic anomaly, noted in multiple independent reports by multiple independent observers with no apparent connection to one another. In September of 1882, the Worthington Advance reported the discovery of a skeleton measuring 8 feet 4 inches near Mound City, Ohio, the same complex that now forms part of Hopewell Culture National Historical Park.
The report names the excavators, it names the witnesses, it gives dimensions. The Smithsonian's own mound exploration team arrived at that site within weeks. The skeleton was crated. It was shipped to Washington. It does not appear in any subsequent Smithsonian catalog. Here is the question I keep returning to. The Smithsonian was meticulous about cataloging ordinary artifacts, pottery, tools, copper ornaments, beads. They have published records of thousands of items from that era. The organization prided itself on systematic documentation. So why is the cataloging record so incomplete when it comes to this one specific category of remains? Here is where the history becomes uncomfortable. Because it is not one missing skeleton, it is not 10, and the pattern of disappearance follows the same institutional address every single time.
Let us be precise about what we are actually looking at. Researcher Richard Dewhurst spent 14 years compiling newspaper accounts of giant skeleton discoveries in the United States prior to 1900. His research, whatever one thinks of his conclusions, documents over 1,000 separate newspaper reports. He cross-referenced them with the locations of known Smithsonian field teams during the same periods. The overlap is not occasional, it is systematic. Field team arrives, remains are collected, remains do not appear in public catalogs. This is not a conspiracy in the dramatic sense. There were no secret meetings in candlelit rooms. It was something more durable than a conspiracy. It was convergent interest, a term worth understanding precisely. Convergent interest means that multiple parties, without coordinating, all benefit from the same outcome, and therefore all act in the same direction. No coordination required, no villain required, just aligned incentives. What were those interests? By 1881, the Smithsonian's Bureau of Ethnology was deeply committed to a specific scientific thesis that the mounds were built by the direct ancestors of living Native American tribes, and that there was no evidence of a prior, separate, or more advanced civilization in North America. This thesis had significant political utility. It resolved, conveniently, a number of uncomfortable legal questions about land ownership and indigenous rights that were being actively contested in federal courts during Reconstruction and its aftermath. A competing narrative, one involving a prior civilization of physically anomalous people, would have destabilized both the scientific framework and the legal framework simultaneously. The man most responsible for cementing that official narrative was John Wesley Powell, the first director of the Bureau of American Ethnology, appointed in 1879. Powell was a celebrated explorer and a genuine scientist. He was also deeply influenced by the racial science theories of his era, which held that human civilizations developed in a single linear progression, and that there could be no lost American civilization more advanced than the existing record showed. Powell controlled publication. Powell controlled funding. Powell controlled which field reports reached the academic journals and which did not. Between 1881 and 1900, the Bureau of American Ethnology received funding of approximately $57,000 per year from Congress, roughly $1.8 million in today's terms annually, specifically to produce conclusions that would shape federal Indian policy. The science and the policy were not separate operations. The shipping crate is where they met.
His name was John Emmert. He was a field agent for the Bureau of Ethnology, stationed primarily in Tennessee and Kentucky during the late 1880s. He was not a scientist by training.
He was a surveyor, a careful man who measured things and wrote down what he saw. He filed regular reports to Washington in neat, precise handwriting. In 1887, Emmert excavated a mound near Brush Creek, Tennessee. His field report, which survives in partial form in the National Anthropological Archives, describes the discovery of skeletal remains he measured at over 7 feet. He noted the unusual size of the skull. He noted what he described as a double row of molars on the lower jaw. He packed the remains in a crate as instructed and shipped them to Washington. Then he wrote a follow-up letter asking for the classification number assigned to the remains, standard procedure, the way he tracked his own work. He never received a reply. He wrote again in 1888 and again in 1889. The correspondence ends there. His name appears nowhere in the 1894 final report. A man who measured and shipped the evidence was disappeared from the record alongside it.
John Emmert was not alone. In 1885, a construction crew excavating a railroad bed near Cartersville, Georgia, unearthed what local newspapers described as the remains of at least 3 individuals of exceptional size, along with copper artifacts and carved stone tablets. The Atlanta Constitution covered the story on September 14th of that year. A Smithsonian representative arrived within the month. The tablets, called the Bat Creek Stone's regional counterparts by some researchers, were shipped north. The stone tablets were later published in a bureau report. The skeletal remains were not mentioned. In Wisconsin, in 1891, a farmer named James Hemp uncovered a burial site on his property near Lake Mills, the same region now associated with the Astalin archaeological site, and reported remains of extraordinary size to the local historical society. The Milwaukee Sentinel covered the discovery. A bureau team arrived and collected the remains for safekeeping. The Lake Mills remains have never been publicly displayed. The individual cases each have a conventional explanation: misidentification, poor measurement, journalistic exaggeration. Together, they describe something else entirely. Here is what the records actually show. The Smithsonian did not merely collect these remains. In several documented instances, they actively discouraged independent researchers from accessing sites before federal teams arrived.
You might be tempted to think this is a story about bones. It is not. It is a story about who controls the record of what human beings have been and what they have built. Because the same mechanism that operated in the 1880s operates today. The same convergent interests, scientific consensus, institutional funding, policy utility, still determine which findings receive publication and which are quietly filed in the residual collection. We do not question the Smithsonian's conclusions about ancient America because we assume their process was clean. But we have now seen the process. We have read the letters. We have found the field agents whose names were removed from the final reports. The institution that told you what ancient America looked like also decided what ancient America was allowed to look like. That system is still running today. The shipping crate just has a different name.
Somewhere in the residual collection of the National Museum of Natural History, in the sub-basement storage, in the rolling shelves that most researchers never reach, there are crates that have not been opened since the 1890s. John Emmert packed some of them. He measured what was inside them. He wrote it down in careful, precise handwriting and sent the numbers to Washington. And Washington sent him nothing back. I think about him sometimes.
a surveyor standing in a Tennessee field in 1887, measuring something he had no framework to understand, doing his job honestly, trusting that the institution receiving his work would do the same. The field notes survive. The remains do not, officially. And the question that no one in Washington has ever directly answered is not whether those crates still exist. The question is why no one has ever been asked to open them. None of what I have described is hidden from you. If you want to begin where I began, start with 3 locations: the National Anthropological Archives, Smithsonian Institution, Suitland, Maryland, where the Bureau of Ethnology field correspondence is held, including the letter from Cyrus Thomas dated 1897. The Peabody Museum archives at Harvard University, Cambridge, Massachusetts, where Frederick Ward Putnam's original field notes from the Ohio and New England mound excavations are available for scholarly review. The American Antiquarian Society, Worcester, Massachusetts, which holds bound volumes of the American Antiquarian Journal from the 1870s through the 1890s, including the M.C. Reed correspondence. None of these documents are hidden. They simply have never been placed next to each other and read in sequence.